Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Her fingers closed around the leather wallet. $847. 3 credit cards. And a business card that read Alexander Cross, CEO. She had 45 seconds before security cameras cycled back. Her mother had 48 hours before the hospital pulled life support. Maya didn't know she'd just stolen from the only man who could save her mother because he was her father. The Four Seasons lobby smelled like money. That's the first thing Maya noticed when she pushed through the revolving glass doors at exactly 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would change 3 lives forever. It smelled like imported orchids and leather furniture and the kind of privilege she'd only ever seen through windows. The marble floor beneath her worn sneakers was so polished she could see her reflection, distorted and wavering, like she was walking on water. Like she didn't belong. And she didn't. The doorman had given her a look. That look. The one that said he was already calculating whether to call security. Maya had practiced her walk for this moment. Casual. Confident. Like she had every right to be there. Like the holes in her jeans were a fashion statement and not the result of 2 years of wearing the same pair because she couldn't afford new ones. Like the faded hoodie covering her thin frame was vintage and not just old. She kept her chin up, her eyes forward, her breath steady even though her heart was slamming against her ribs, so hard she thought everyone in that pristine lobby could hear it. She timed everything, studied the security camera rotation for 3 days, watched from the coffee shop across the street through binoculars she'd borrowed from the public library. She knew the blind spot. 45 seconds. Right between the check-in desk and the bar area, there was an angle where 3 cameras overlapped and created a pocket of invisibility. 45 seconds where you could disappear. Where you could become someone who did things she never thought she'd do. Maya walked toward the bar with purpose, like she was meeting someone. Like she belonged in a place where a single cocktail cost more than her weekly grocery budget. The bartender didn't even glance her way. Good. Invisible. That's what she needed to be. Just another face in a hotel that hosted hundreds of wealthy guests every single day. People who wouldn't miss a few $100s. People who probably spent more on dinner than Maya's mother's medication cost. And then she saw him. Alexander Cross stood at the marble check-in counter with the kind of presence that made everything around him seem smaller. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with salt and pepper hair that looked professionally styled even at the end of a long day. His suit was charcoal gray and fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. Probably had been. His watch caught the chandelier light. Rolex. Maybe $50,000 on his wrist alone. Maya felt something twist in her stomach. Not quite hatred. Not quite envy. Something darker and more desperate. He set his wallet down on the counter. Black leather. Expensive. Probably Italian. To set it down like it was nothing. Like the money inside wasn't the difference between life and death. Like losing it would be an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. The front desk clerk was typing something into the computer, and Alexander was looking at his phone, and the wallet just sat there. Unguarded. Calling to her. Maya's mother's face flashed through her mind. Eleanor. 48 years old, and dying in a hospital bed 12 blocks away. Machines breathing for her. Tubes in her arms. Her skin the color of old paper. The doctor's voice from that morning still echoed in Maya's ears. 48 hours. That's what Dr. Chin had said. 48 hours to come up with $250,000 for the experimental treatment, or they'd move Eleanor to hospice. To die. To give up. This is wrong, Maya thought. Her hands were already trembling. You're not a thief. You're not this person. But her mother was dying. This is so wrong. But what choice did she have? She tried everything. GoFundMe. Loans. Payment plans. Begging. She'd gotten on her knees in that hospital administrator's office and begged. None of it mattered. The system didn't care about desperation. It cared about money. And Maya had 48 hours. She moved. 27 seconds left in the blind spot. Her feet carried her forward on autopilot, muscle memory from a plan she'd rehearsed in her head 1,000 times. She walked past Alexander Cross close enough to smell his cologne. Something expensive. Cedar and bergamot. The scent of a world she'd never touch. Her hand was in her jacket pocket. Ready. Steady. Don't shake. Don't breathe. Don't think. 20 seconds. The wallet was right there. 6 inches from her. She could feel the cold sweat running down her spine. Could taste copper in her mouth. Fear. Guilt. Desperation all mixed together. The lobby conversations around her blurred into white noise. Someone laughed. A phone rang. The front desk printer word. Normal sounds. A normal evening. Except Maya was about to cross a line she could never uncross. 15 seconds. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the leather. Still warm from being in his pocket. In some distant part of her brain that wasn't screaming at her to run, she noticed her hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady. Determined. She'd made her choice. Right or wrong, she'd chosen her mother's life over her own morality. She could live with being a thief. She couldn't live with letting her mother die. 10 seconds. The wallet slid into her jacket, so smoothly it felt like it wanted to be stolen. Like the universe was giving her permission. She didn't look at it. Didn't check to see if anyone noticed. Just turned, smooth and casual, back toward the bar. Back toward the exit. Back toward the blind spot that would save her or destroy her. 5 seconds. And then Alexander Cross turned around. His eyes met hers. Just for 2 seconds. Maybe less. But in those 2 seconds, Maya saw something that made her blood freeze. Not anger. Not accusation. Something else. Something that flickered across his sharp features like recognition. Like he was seeing a ghost. His blue-gray eyes went wide, just slightly, and his mouth opened like he wanted to say something. Like he knew her. But that was impossible. Maya had never seen this man before in her life. She ran. Not walked. Ran. The marble floor was slippery under her sneakers, and she almost fell but caught herself on a decorative column. Behind her, she heard voices rising. Security, move! The girl in the hoodie. Behind her, Alexander Cross was still standing at the counter, and he wasn't chasing her. He was just staring. Staring after her with an expression that wasn't anger or outrage or anything Maya had prepared for. It was confusion. Deep, unsettling confusion. Like he'd just seen something that shattered everything he thought he knew. Like his entire world had tilted on its axis. Like he just looked into the face of his biggest mistake, 22 years too late. Maya burst through the revolving doors into the cold November evening, the stolen wallet burning against her ribs like a coal. She didn't know that inside that wallet, tucked behind the credit cards, was a photograph. A photograph of a young woman with dark hair and knowing eyes. A woman who looked exactly like Maya's mother. A woman Alexander Cross had loved and abandoned 23 years ago. A woman he'd thought about every single day since. Maya didn't know any of that. Not yet. All she knew was that her mother had 47 hours and 58 minutes left, and she just committed the crime that would either save Eleanor's life or destroy them both. What she didn't know was that she'd just stolen from her father, and that Alexander Cross, billionaire CEO, was already picking up the phone to call his head of security with an order that would change everything. Find her, but don't press charges. Not yet. I need to understand why her eyes looked like that. Why she looked like someone I used to know. If you've ever felt so desperate you'd do anything for someone you love, you understand Maya's choice. But here's the thing. 93% of you are watching without subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller. That means you'll miss what happens when Alexander discovers the truth. Don't be the person who watches someone's story and disappears. Subscribe now, or drop in the comments why you're choosing to walk away from this story. Let's see your honesty. 20 years earlier, Maya Torres was 2 years old and didn't know what a father was yet. She didn't know that most families had 2 parents. She didn't know that the apartment they lived in, a cramped 1-bedroom on the 5th floor of a building where the elevator never worked, wasn't normal. She didn't know that her mother, Eleanor, was only 26 years old and already looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than just tired. What Maya knew was that Mommy worked a lot. That Mommy smelled like coffee from the diner where she waitressed during the day and like cleaning supplies from the office building she scrubbed at night. That Mommy's hands were always cold and rough. That Mommy cried sometimes in the bathroom when she thought Maya was asleep. The apartment had one bedroom that Eleanor gave to Maya, and Eleanor slept on a futon in the living room that doubled as their dining room and kitchen and everything else. The walls were thin enough that you could hear the neighbors arguing in Spanish, and the couple upstairs making love, and the man below them coughing through the night. The radiator clanked and hissed, but never quite made the apartment warm enough in winter. The windows rattled when trucks drove by. The fluorescent light in the kitchen buzzed constantly, a sound that became so normal Maya didn't even hear it anymore until years later when she visited a friend's house and realized that silence was supposed to exist. There were photographs on the walls, pictures of Eleanor young and smiling, her arms around empty space. Maya didn't notice for years that the photographs had been torn. Carefully torn, with someone cut out, a shadow where a person used to be, an arm around Eleanor's, waist with no body attached. In one photo, you could see just the edge of a man's shoulder, the corner of what looked like an expensive jacket. In another, a hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder, but the rest of the person was gone, removed, erased, like he'd never existed at all. Maya was 7 the first time she asked about her father. It was career day at school, and all the other kids were talking about what their dads did for work. Firefighter, teacher, mechanic, construction worker. Maya sat there silent because she didn't have an answer. That night, eating spaghetti that was just noodles and butter because that's all they had, Maya looked at her mother and asked the question that had been building in her small chest all day. "Mommy, where's my daddy?" Eleanor's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. For a long moment, she just sat there, frozen, and Maya watched something break behind her mother's eyes. Something that looked like old pain mixed with fresh guilt. "He didn't know about you," Eleanor finally said. Her voice was quiet, careful, like she was walking on glass. "He didn't know about you, baby, and by the time I found out, he was already gone. It's complicated. Some people live in different worlds, and sometimes those worlds can't come together no matter how much you want them to." Maya didn't understand. Not really, but she understood enough. She understood that questions about her father made her mother sad, so she stopped asking. She learned to fill out school forms with just one parent's name. She learned to make up stories when kids asked. "He's away on business. He's in the military. He's not in the picture." She learned to watch other girls with their fathers at school events and feel something hollow open up in her chest. Something that felt like hunger but wasn't about food. A hunger for something she'd never had and couldn't name. Growing up poor isn't something that happens to you all at once. It's 1,000 small humiliations that add up over years until they become the background noise of your existence. It's wearing the same 3 outfits to school in rotation and hoping no one notices. It's shopping at Goodwill and pretending the worn clothes are a choice. It's birthday parties you can't attend because the gift would cost too much. It's field trips you miss because the $20 fee might as well be $200. It's learning to say you're not hungry when there's only enough food for one person and making sure your mother eats it. It's watching your mother work herself to exhaustion and knowing, even as a child, that no matter how hard she works, it will never be enough. Maya was smart, scary smart, the kind of smart that teachers noticed and tried to nurture despite the system being designed to overlook kids like her. She got a scholarship to a better middle school across town. She rode 2 buses to get there every morning, leaving at 6 a.m. and getting home at 7 p.m. She studied in the public library because their apartment was too noisy. She did her homework on scraps of paper because notebooks were expensive. She became the scholarship kid, the poor kid, the kid who brought lunch in a plastic bag because she didn't have a lunchbox, the kid who never had money for the book fair or the vending machine or the little things that other kids didn't even think about. But Maya had something those other kids didn't have. She had Eleanor, her mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to help with homework at midnight, who saved for months to buy Maya a used laptop when she needed it for school, who never, not once, made Maya feel like she was a burden, who loved her with a fierce, protective intensity that felt like armor against the world. Eleanor had given up everything for Maya, had given up college, given up dreams, given up whatever life she might have had. And Maya knew it. Even as a child, she knew it. The weight of that sacrifice sat on her shoulders like a physical thing. "I'm going to make it right," Maya promised when she was 12, sitting at their tiny kitchen table while Eleanor counted change to see if they had enough for groceries. I'm going to be a doctor and make lots of money and buy you a house, and you'll never have to work again." Eleanor had smiled, tired and sad and loving all at once. "Baby, you don't owe me anything," she'd said. But Maya did. She owed her everything. Maya was 15 when everything changed. It was a Tuesday. Maya remembered because she had a chemistry test the next day and she was up late studying. She heard the thud from the living room. Not loud, just a soft sound like something heavy hitting carpet. She found her mother on the floor, unconscious, her face gray and her breathing shallow. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and fear and a paramedic asking questions Maya couldn't answer. Medical history? Don't know. Medications? None. Insurance? Maya didn't even know if they had insurance. The emergency room doctor was young and looked concerned in a way that made Maya's stomach twist with fear. "Your mother collapsed due to extremely low blood pressure and possible organ dysfunction," he said, using words that Maya had to look up later. "We're running tests, but her symptoms are consistent with a rare autoimmune condition. It's affecting her kidneys and possibly her heart. We need to do more comprehensive testing. Do you have insurance?" Maya shook her head. The doctor's face changed, became more closed off, more careful. "We'll do what we can," he said, which Maya would learn over the years was code for "we'll do the minimum required by law and not a single thing more." That was the beginning. The first collapse. The first hospital bill that Eleanor couldn't pay. $3,200 for 4 hours in the emergency room and a handful of tests that didn't even give them a diagnosis. Eleanor negotiated it down to $50 a month. It would take 5 years to pay off. By then, there would be more bills. So many more. The collapses became more frequent. Once a year, then twice a year, then every few months. Mystery illness, the doctors called it. Rare autoimmune disorder. Possibly genetic. Possibly environmental. Possibly we have no idea and we're not going to try very hard to find out because you don't have good insurance. Maya watched her mother deteriorate in slow motion. Watched her go from working 2 jobs to barely managing 1. Watched her save her medication to make it last longer, taking half doses to stretch the prescription. Watched her pretend she felt fine when Maya could see the pain in every movement. And with every collapse, every hospital visit, every bill, Maya felt that promise from years ago get heavier. "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make it right." She threw herself into her studies with desperate intensity. Straight A's, perfect SAT scores, scholarship applications to every pre-med program in the country. She was going to become a doctor. She was going to understand what was wrong with her mother. She was going to save her. But time, Maya learned, doesn't care about your plans. She was 22, in her junior year of college, working 3 part-time jobs to supplement her scholarship and help with Eleanor's medical bills when she got the call. Her mother had collapsed again. But this time was different. This time, Eleanor didn't wake up. This time, the doctors used words like acute kidney failure and cardiac complications and experimental treatment that might work but costs $250,000, and without it, your mother has maybe weeks. Maybe days if she continues to decline at this rate. 20 years earlier, Maya Torres was 2 years old and didn't know what a father was yet. She didn't know that most families had 2 parents. She didn't know that the apartment they lived in, a cramped 1-bedroom on the 5th floor of a building where the elevator never worked, wasn't normal. She didn't know that her mother, Eleanor, was only 26 years old and already looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than just tired. What Maya knew was that Mommy worked a lot. That Mommy smelled like coffee from the diner where she waitressed during the day and like cleaning supplies from the office building she scrubbed at night. That Mommy's hands were always cold and rough. That Mommy cried sometimes in the bathroom when she thought Maya was asleep. The apartment had 1 bedroom that Eleanor gave to Maya, and Eleanor slept on a futon in the living room that doubled as their dining room and kitchen and everything else. The walls were thin enough that you could hear the neighbors arguing in Spanish and the couple upstairs making love, and the man below them coughing through the night. The radiator clanked and hissed, but never quite made the apartment warm enough in winter. The windows rattled when trucks drove by. The fluorescent light in the kitchen buzzed constantly, a sound that became so normal Maya didn't even hear it anymore until years later when she visited a friend's house and realized that silence was supposed to exist. There were photographs on the walls, Pictures of Eleanor young and smiling, her arms around empty space. Maya didn't notice for years that the photographs had been torn. Carefully torn, with someone cut out. A shadow where a person used to be. An arm around Eleanor's, waist with no body attached. In one photo, you could see just the edge of a man's shoulder, the corner of what looked like an expensive jacket. In another, a hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder, but the rest of the person was gone. Removed. Erased. Like he'd never existed at all. Maya was 7 the first time she asked about her father. It was career day at school, and all the other kids were talking about what their dads did for work. Firefighter. Teacher. Mechanic. Construction worker. Maya sat there silent because she didn't have an answer. That night, eating spaghetti that was just noodles and butter because that's all they had, Maya looked at her mother and asked the question that had been building in her small chest all day. "Mommy, where's my daddy?" Eleanor's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. For a long moment, she just sat there, frozen, and Maya watched something break behind her mother's eyes. Something that looked like old pain mixed with fresh guilt. "He didn't know about you," Eleanor finally said. Her voice was quiet, careful, like she was walking on glass. "He didn't know about you, baby, and by the time I found out, he was already gone. It's complicated. Some people live in different worlds, and sometimes those worlds can't come together no matter how much you want them to." Maya didn't understand. Not really, but she understood enough. She understood that questions about her father made her mother sad, so she stopped asking. She learned to fill out school forms with just one parent's name. She learned to make up stories when kids asked. "He's away on business. He's in the military. He's not in the picture." She learned to watch other girls with their fathers at school events and feel something hollow open up in her chest. Something that felt like hunger, but wasn't about food. A hunger for something she'd never had and couldn't name. Growing up poor isn't something that happens to you all at once. It's 1,000 small humiliations that add up over years until they become the background noise of your existence. It's wearing the same 3 outfits to school in rotation and hoping no one notices. It's shopping at Goodwill and pretending the worn clothes are a choice. It's birthday parties you can't attend because the gift would cost too much. It's field trips you miss because the $20 fee might as well be $200. It's learning to say you're not hungry when there's only enough food for one person and making sure your mother eats it. It's watching your mother work herself to exhaustion and knowing, even as a child, that no matter how hard she works, it will never be enough. Maya was smart, scary smart, the kind of smart that teachers noticed and tried to nurture despite the system being designed to overlook kids like her. She got a scholarship to a better middle school across town. She rode 2 buses to get there every morning, leaving at 6 a.m. and getting home at 7 p.m. She studied in the public library because their apartment was too noisy. She did her homework on scraps of paper because notebooks were expensive. She became the scholarship kid, the poor kid, the kid who brought lunch in a plastic bag because she didn't have a lunchbox, the kid who never had money for the book fair or the vending machine or the little things that other kids didn't even think about. But Maya had something those other kids didn't have. She had Eleanor, her mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to help with homework at midnight, who saved for months to buy Maya a used laptop when she needed it for school, who never, not once, made Maya feel like she was a burden, who loved her with a fierce, protective intensity that felt like armor against the world. Eleanor had given up everything for Maya, had given up college, given up dreams, given up whatever life she might have had. And Maya knew it. Even as a child, she knew it. The weight of that sacrifice sat on her shoulders like a physical thing. "I'm going to make it right," Maya promised when she was 12, sitting at their tiny kitchen table while Eleanor counted change to see if they had enough for groceries. "I'm going to be a doctor and make lots of money and buy you a house, and you'll never have to work again." Eleanor had smiled, tired and sad and loving all at once. "Baby, you don't owe me anything," she'd said. But Maya did. She owed her everything. Maya was 15 when everything changed. It was a Tuesday. Maya remembered because she had a chemistry test the next day and she was up late studying. She heard the thud from the living room. Not loud, just a soft sound like something heavy hitting carpet. She found her mother on the floor, unconscious, her face gray and her breathing shallow. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and fear and a paramedic asking questions Maya couldn't answer. Medical history? Don't know. Medications? None. Insurance? Maya didn't even know if they had insurance. The emergency room doctor was young and looked concerned in a way that made Maya's stomach twist with fear. Your mother collapsed due to extremely low blood pressure and possible organ dysfunction, he said, using words that Maya had to look up later. We're running tests, but her symptoms are consistent with a rare autoimmune condition. It's affecting her kidneys and possibly her heart. We need to do more comprehensive testing. Do you have insurance? Maya shook her head. The doctor's face changed, became more closed off, more careful. We'll do what we can, he said, which Maya would learn over the years was code for we'll do the minimum required by law and not a single thing more. That was the beginning. The first collapse. The first hospital bill that Eleanor couldn't pay. $3,200 for 4 hours in the emergency room and a handful of tests that didn't even give them a diagnosis. Eleanor negotiated it down to $50 a month. It would take 5 years to pay off. By then, there would be more bills. So many more. The collapses became more frequent. Once a year, then twice a year, then every few months. Mystery illness, the doctors called it. Rare autoimmune disorder. Possibly genetic. Possibly environmental. Possibly, we have no idea and we're not going to try very hard to find out because you don't have good insurance. Maya watched her mother deteriorate in slow motion. Watched her go from working 2 jobs to barely managing 1. Watched her save her medication to make it last longer, taking half doses to stretch the prescription. Watched her pretend she felt fine when Maya could see the pain in every movement. And with every collapse, every hospital visit, every bill, Maya felt that promise from years ago get heavier. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make it right. She threw herself into her studies with desperate intensity. Straight A's, perfect SAT scores, scholarship applications to every pre-med program in the country. She was going to become a doctor. She was going to understand what was wrong with her mother. She was going to save her. But time, Maya learned, doesn't care about your plans. She was 22, in her junior year of college, working 3 part-time jobs to supplement her scholarship and help with Eleanor's medical bills when she got the call. Her mother had collapsed again. But this time was different. This time, Eleanor didn't wake up. This time, the doctors used words like acute kidney failure and cardiac complications and experimental treatment that might work but costs $250,000, and without it, your mother has maybe weeks. Maybe days if she continues to decline at this rate. 23 years before Maya stood in that hotel lobby with trembling hands and a stolen wallet, Alexander Cross was 27 years old and thought he had his entire life figured out. He was in his 2nd year at Columbia Business School, and unlike most of his classmates who were there to network and coast on family connections, Alexander was there to prove something. He came from old money, the kind of wealth that stretched back 5 generations to railroad tycoons and Industrial Revolution fortunes. The kind of money that opened every door before you even knocked. But Alexander wanted more than his trust fund. He wanted to build something himself. Something that would make his own name mean something beyond his family legacy. He studied until 3 in the morning. He was first in his class. He had already started his first company, a tech startup that was getting attention from venture capitalists. He was ambitious in a way that burned, that consumed everything around it, that left no room for anything that didn't serve the plan. And then he met Eleanor Bennett in a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday in October, and for the first time in his life, Alexander Cross's carefully constructed plan hit something it couldn't absorb. She was at the counter ahead of him, a grad student in public health, and she was arguing with the barista about whether a latte was supposed to cost $6. $6 for coffee is criminal, she was saying, and there was something in her voice that was both angry and amused, like she couldn't quite believe the absurdity of it all. Alexander had laughed. Actually laughed out loud. The barista looked offended. Eleanor turned around, and when their eyes met, Alexander felt something shift in his chest that he would spend the next 23 years trying to forget. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or designer clothes. She wore jeans with actual holes in them, not the expensive kind that came pre-distressed, but real holes from wear. Her sweater was oversized and looked like it came from a thrift store. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had a canvas bag covered in pins with political slogans and public health awareness messages. She was everything Alexander's world wasn't. Real. Unpolished. Angry about things that mattered. And when she smiled at him, a little embarrassed that he'd overheard her complaining about coffee prices, Alexander Cross, who had his entire life mapped out in 5-year increments, felt something terrifying and wonderful at the same time. He felt like he wanted to know everything about this woman. He felt like his plan might not be the only thing that mattered. "I'll buy your criminally expensive latte," he'd said. She'd raised an eyebrow. "Are you trying to buy my attention?" He'd smiled. "Is it working?" She'd laughed then, and it was the most genuine sound he'd ever heard. "Maybe," she'd said, "but you'll have to do better than a $6 latte." So he did. He asked her to dinner. She said yes. And for 3 months, Alexander Cross lived 2 lives. There was the life his family and classmates saw, where he was the driven future CEO networking at the right parties and making the right connections. And then there was the life he lived with Eleanor in her tiny apartment in a neighborhood his family would never visit, eating takeout and talking until dawn about everything and nothing. Eleanor was getting her master's in public health because she wanted to fix broken systems. She wanted to make healthcare accessible to people who couldn't afford it. She grew up poor in Ohio, raised by a single mother who cleaned houses, and she'd worked her way through undergrad on scholarships and loans and sheer determination. She saw the world in a way Alexander never had. She talked about inequality and justice and the responsibilities of people with privilege. She challenged him. She made him think about things beyond profit margins and market share. She made him want to be better. Not just successful, but good. And somewhere in those 3 months, Alexander fell in love with her in a way that was consuming and terrifying and completely outside his plan. They kept it secret. Alexander told himself it was because they were both busy, because they wanted privacy, because new relationships were fragile things. But the truth was simpler and uglier. He was ashamed. Not of Eleanor, never of Eleanor, but of what his family would say, what his world would think. Eleanor didn't fit into the boxes his life required. She didn't come from the right family, didn't have the right connections, didn't understand the unspoken rules of his social class. And as much as Alexander loved her, as much as he wanted to believe that love was enough, there was a part of him that knew his family would never accept her. That his plan, his carefully constructed future, didn't have room for a woman who argued about coffee prices and wanted to change the world instead of profit from it. It all fell apart on a Friday in January. Alexander's mother showed up at his apartment unannounced, which she never did, and her face was cold in a way that made Alexander's stomach drop. "We need to talk," she'd said. She knew about Eleanor. Of course she knew. The Cross family didn't let their heirs wander around unsupervised. There were people who watched, people who reported, and someone had reported that Alexander was spending time with a girl from the wrong side of everywhere, a scholarship student with no family money and no prospects and no place in their world. His mother sat on his expensive leather couch in his expensive apartment that his trust fund paid for and delivered the ultimatum with the kind of calm that made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "You will end this relationship," she'd said. "You will stop seeing this girl. And you will marry Catherine Morrison next summer as we've planned." Catherine was the daughter of another wealthy family, the kind of arranged marriage that wasn't officially arranged but had been understood since they were children. Catherine was appropriate. Eleanor was not. "Your father and I have overlooked your little rebellion," his mother continued. "We've let you play at being self-made. But this company you're building, the venture capital you're courting, the doors that are opening for you, those doors exist because of the Cross name, because of our connections, because of who we are. You throw that away for some girl who wants to save the world, and you'll have nothing. No company, no inheritance, no future. Choose." Alexander had wanted to fight, had wanted to tell his mother that he loved Eleanor, that she was worth more than all the money and connections in the world, that he wasn't going to let his family dictate his life. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "I understand." 2 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 2 words that meant he'd already made his choice. Not the brave choice, not the right choice, the practical choice, the coward's choice. He chose the empire over the girl. He chose his plan over his heart. He chose the future his family had mapped out over the future he actually wanted. He met Eleanor 2 days later at her apartment. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. She'd made tea, and they sat on her threadbare couch, and Alexander delivered the speech he'd rehearsed. "This isn't working. We're too different. I need to focus on school and my career." All the cliches that people use when they're too cowardly to tell the truth. Eleanor had just looked at him with those knowing eyes, and she'd said, "Your family found out." It wasn't a question. Alexander hadn't answered, which was answer enough. She'd nodded slowly, and he watched something break in her face. Something that looked like hope dying. "I thought you were different," she'd said quietly. "I thought you saw me as more than where I came from. I guess I was wrong." Alexander had left her apartment that night and felt something inside him crack. He told himself it was for the best, that he'd made the rational choice, that love wasn't enough to build a life on. He threw himself into his work with even more intensity, trying to bury the feeling that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. He married Catherine Morrison 6 months later in a ceremony that cost $300,000 and felt like a funeral. Catherine was beautiful and accomplished and completely wrong for him. She knew it too. On their wedding night, she looked at him and said, "We don't have to pretend this is a love match. We can be partners, build something together, have the life our families expect. It's enough." And Alexander had agreed, because what else could he say? For 10 years, Alexander built his empire. Cross Industries grew from that first startup into a multinational corporation. He became the kind of billionaire who appeared in Forbes magazine and gave keynote speeches at conferences. He had everything he'd wanted. The success, the respect that had nothing to do with his family name, the proof that he could build something himself. And it all felt hollow, empty, like ashes in his mouth. Catherine divorced him after 10 years of polite cohabitation. There were no children. Catherine had never wanted them, and Alexander had been relieved because how could he be a father when he felt like half a person? When he felt like he'd left the best part of himself in a cramped apartment with a woman who'd believed in him and whom he betrayed? He kept one photograph hidden in his desk drawer. A picture of Eleanor taken on one of their dates, laughing at something he'd said, her face full of light and joy. Sometimes, late at night in his empty penthouse, Alexander would look at that photo and wonder what happened to her, wonder if she ever thought about him, wonder if she was happy, wonder what his life would have been like if he'd been brave enough to choose her. The wondering became a kind of penance, a reminder of the price of ambition, a ghost that haunted every success. And then, 23 years later, Alexander stood in a hotel lobby and watched a young woman steal his wallet, and for 2 seconds, their eyes met, and Alexander felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. They were Eleanor's eyes. The same shape, the same color, the same desperate intensity. And the girl's face, beneath the fear and determination, had Eleanor's bone structure, Eleanor's mouth, Eleanor's everything. In those 2 seconds, a possibility opened up in Alexander's mind that was too huge and terrible to fully process. But his brain was already doing the math. 23 years. A girl who looked like Eleanor. The right age. Oh God. Oh no. What had he done? Alexander made a choice 23 years ago that destroyed 3 lives, though he only knew about one of them at the time. You're making a choice right now. Subscribe to Olivia the Storyteller or don't. But unlike Alexander, you can fix this in 1 second. The subscribe button is right there. Or drop a comment explaining why this story doesn't deserve your subscription. Make your choice. Back to the present. 48 hours before Maya stood in that hotel lobby with Alexander Cross's wallet burning against her ribs. 48 hours that felt like 48 years compressed into a space too small to breathe. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and death, that particular combination of cleaning chemicals and human decay that hospitals try to mask but never quite succeed. Eleanor lay in the bed, connected to machines that beeped in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to Maya's nightmares. Each beat meant her mother's heart was still beating. Each whoosh of the ventilator meant her lungs were still filling with air, even if they needed help to do it. The 4 drip was steady and mechanical, and the only thing keeping Eleanor's blood pressure high enough to sustain life. Dr. Chen came in at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon on a Monday that would split Maya's life into before and after. Dr. Chen was a small woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and the kind of exhausted compassion that came from delivering bad news too many times. She held a tablet, and her face was carefully neutral in that way doctors practiced, the expression that said, "I'm about to destroy your world, but I'm going to do it gently." Maya knew that look. She'd seen it before. But this time felt different. This time felt final. Dr. Chen sat down, which was never a good sign. Doctors who stood while they talked were delivering manageable news. Doctors who sat were delivering the kind of news that required you to already be sitting down. "We have your mother's test results back," Dr. Chen said, and her voice was soft and professional, and Maya hated it immediately because soft voices meant bad news. "Your mother has a rare genetic autoimmune condition that's been progressively attacking her organs. Her kidneys are at 15% function. Her heart is weakened. Without intervention, she has weeks at best." Maya had heard some version of this before, but Dr. Chen wasn't finished. "There's an experimental treatment that's shown promising results in clinical trials. It's a combination of targeted immunotherapy and gene therapy. In patients with your mother's specific markers, it has an 85% success rate. But there's always a but," Maya thought. "The but is where hope goes to die. The but is where reality lives. The but is where people like her, people without money, people who did everything right and still lost, that's where they lived. In the but." But Dr. Chen continued, and Maya could see her measuring her words carefully. "This treatment is experimental and not covered by insurance. The cost is $250,000. You have 48 hours to secure funding, or we'll need to transfer your mother to hospice care." "I'm so sorry, Maya. I wish I had better options for you." Those last words sounded genuine, and Maya believed Dr. Chen really was sorry, but sorry didn't change anything. Sorry didn't pay medical bills. Sorry didn't save dying mothers. Sorry was just another word for "I can't help you." Maya sat there for a long moment after Dr. Chen left, just watching her mother breathe with mechanical assistance, watching the monitors track a life that was slipping away in real time. $250,000. 48 hours. The numbers didn't connect to anything real in Maya's brain. She didn't know anyone with that kind of money. Didn't know anyone who knew anyone with that kind of money. She existed in a world where $250,000 was a house or a lifetime of savings or something abstract that happened to other people. It wasn't something you came up with in 48 hours. It was impossible. The word kept echoing in her head. Impossible. 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 Maya walked to the bathroom attached to her mother's hospital room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She closed the door and locked it and looked at herself in the fluorescent-lit mirror. She looked like a ghost. Dark circles under her eyes from weeks of sleeping in hospital chairs. Her face was thinner, sharper, like the stress had carved away everything soft. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that she hadn't washed in 3 days. She was wearing the same jeans and hoodie she'd been wearing for 48 hours. She looked exactly like what she was. Desperate, exhausted, defeated. And then Maya opened her mouth and screamed. It was silent. She screamed with her mouth wide open, and no sound came out because she was in a hospital and her mother was dying, and you don't get to scream in hospitals. You don't get to fall apart where people can see. You hold it together. You swallow the fear and rage and helplessness. You scream silently in bathrooms where no one can hear you breaking. Maya screamed until her throat hurt and her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She slid down the bathroom wall and sat on the cold tile floor and screamed silently into her hands. And when the screaming was done, when there was nothing left but the empty ache, Maya stood up and washed her face with cold water and looked at herself in the mirror again. Her eyes stared back at her. Blue-gray eyes. She'd always wondered where she got them from. Eleanor's eyes were brown, warm and soft and nothing like Maya's. Maya's eyes were sharp, cold, the color of storm clouds. She'd asked her mother once where those eyes came from, and Eleanor had just looked sad and said, "From your father." That was all. Just from your father, like it explained everything and nothing at the same time. Maya looked at those strangers' eyes in the mirror and made a decision. She didn't know it yet, not consciously, but somewhere in the broken, desperate parts of her brain, the decision was forming. If the system wouldn't save her mother, Maya would find another way. Any way. She walked back into the hospital room and pulled out her phone. The math was simple and brutal. Her savings account, everything she had from years of part-time jobs and careful budgeting, held $3,417. The GoFundMe she'd started 2 weeks ago had raised $12,000 from friends and strangers, and people who cared but didn't have much to give. $15,000 total. She needed $250,000. She'd applied for medical loans from 6 different companies. All denied. Her credit history was too short. Her income too low. She was 22 years old with student debt and no assets, and the financial system looked at her application and said no in 6 different polite ways. The hospital had offered a payment plan, $18,000 down, and the rest over 10 years at 9% interest. She didn't have $18,000. She barely had 15. Maya did the math over and over on her phone calculator like somehow the numbers would change if she just checked one more time. 15,000 from 15,000 equals 15,000. 250,000 minus 15,000 equals 235,000. 235,000 divided by 48 hours equals $4,895 per hour. She would need to earn almost $5,000 an hour for the next 2 days straight to save her mother. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was the kind of math that made you understand that the world was designed for some people to live and other people to die based solely on how much money they had access to. Maya wanted to throw her phone across the room, wanted to scream again, wanted to burn down a system that let people die because they couldn't pay. Instead, she sat next to her mother's bed and held her hand. Eleanor's hand was cold and thin, and the skin felt like paper. Maya could see every vein, every bone. Her mother had always had strong hands, working hands, hands that had held Maya through every nightmare, every fever, every moment of childhood fear. Now those hands felt fragile, like they might break if Maya held on too tight. "I don't know what to do," Maya whispered. "Mom, I don't know how to save you. Tell me what to do." Eleanor's eyes fluttered. She'd been mostly unconscious for 2 days, kept sedated to ease the pain and conserve her body's resources. But sometimes she surfaced briefly into semi-consciousness. Her lips moved. Maya leaned closer, straining to hear. "Alexander," Eleanor whispered. The word was barely audible. Maya frowned. "Who?" Eleanor's eyes were still closed, but her lips kept moving. "Alexander Cross. 4 seasons. Always loved him. Tell her someday." The words came in fragments, disconnected and soft. Maya's heart clenched. Her mother was delirious, hallucinating, remembering things from the past. Alexander Cross. The name meant nothing to Maya. Just fever dreams. Just the brain misfiring under stress and medication. But something about the name stuck. Alexander Cross. 4 seasons. Maya pulled out her phone and Googled it more out of desperation than anything else. She needed to do something, anything, to feel less helpless. The search results loaded. Alexander Cross, CEO of Cross Industries. Billionaire. Net worth estimated at $4.7 billion. Currently in New York for the annual Technology and Innovation Conference at the 4 Seasons Hotel. Maya stared at the screen. 4 seasons. That's what her mother had said. Was this the Alexander her mother was talking about? Some billionaire? It didn't make sense. Eleanor had never mentioned knowing anyone wealthy. Never mentioned anyone named Alexander at all except in those vague non-answers about Maya's father over the years. Maya scrolled through images. Alexander Cross at various events. Charity galas. Business conferences. Award ceremonies. He was handsome in that way wealthy older men were, with expensive haircuts and tailored suits, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He looked nothing like anyone Maya's mother would know. But the coincidence was strange. 4 seasons. The same hotel. And her mother had said the name like it mattered. Like it meant something. Maya looked at conference schedule. Alexander Cross was keynote speaker tomorrow night. Would be staying at the 4 Seasons for 3 days. Would be there, in New York, accessible, with more money than Maya could comprehend. An idea formed. It was terrible, immoral, criminal, but it formed anyway in the desperate spaces where logic and morality go to die when someone you love is dying and the system has failed you completely. Billionaires had money, more money than they could ever spend. More money than any single person needed. And Maya needed $250,000 to save her mother's life. What was $250,000 to someone worth billions? A rounding error. Pocket change. Nothing. What if Maya could just take a little? Just borrow enough to save Eleanor? She could pay it back later. Somehow. When she was a doctor. When she had money. It wasn't really stealing if she was going to pay it back. Right. The rationalizations came fast and desperate. She wasn't a bad person. She'd never stolen anything in her life. But her mother was dying. And 48 hours was ticking down to 47 hours and 53 minutes. And somewhere in New York, a billionaire who would never notice the money was staying at a hotel. And Maya's mother had said his name in her delirium. It felt like a sign. It felt like the universe giving her permission. It felt like the only option left when all the good options had been exhausted. Maya looked up the hotel. Looked up the security. Started planning something she never thought she'd plan. Started becoming someone she never thought she'd be. A thief. But a thief with a reason. A thief saving her mother. That made it different. Didn't it? Maya had 48 hours to save her mother. You have 5 seconds to click subscribe on Olivia the Storyteller. One of these is life or death. The other costs you nothing but helps the story reach people who need it. Or comment below and finish the sentence honestly. I don't subscribe because... Let's see your reason. Maya's legs were already moving before her brain caught up to what she'd done. She'd just stolen from a billionaire in a luxury hotel with security cameras everywhere and guards who probably had military training. Run. That was the only thought that made sense. Run now, think later. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble floor and the sound seemed impossibly loud, like an alarm announcing her crime to everyone in that pristine lobby. Behind her, she heard voices rising. Sharp, authoritative voices. Security voices. Stop. Someone stop her. The girl in the hoodie. And then the sound that made her blood freeze, the crackle of a radio and heavy footsteps moving fast. Maya hit the revolving door at full speed and burst onto the street into the cold November evening. The sidewalk was crowded with people leaving work, tourists taking photos, the usual chaos of New York at rush hour. Perfect. She needed crowds. Needed to disappear. She turned left and started running, really running, and this was where 4 years of high school track paid off in ways her coach never could have imagined. Maya had gotten a partial scholarship to college for running. She'd spent her teenage years training, running until her lungs burned and her legs screamed, because running was free exercise and running fast enough meant scholarship money. She'd done the 400-meter dash. Sprint distance. The kind of running where you gave everything you had for 60 seconds and then collapsed. She wasn't collapsing now. Maya wove through the crowd with the kind of spatial awareness that came from years of navigating packed city streets and running through obstacles. She dodged a man with a briefcase, sidestepped a woman walking 3 dogs, jumped over a discarded pizza box. Behind her, she could hear security trying to follow, but they were bigger, slower, less desperate. Maya took a sharp right down a side street, and her feet barely touched the ground. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, so hard she thought it might break through. The wallet in her jacket pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Like evidence. Like proof of who she'd become. She saw the subway entrance ahead and put on a final burst of speed. Down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, nearly falling, catching herself on the railing. She could hear the train below, the rumble of it approaching the station. She jumped the turnstile, didn't have time to swipe a card, just vaulted over it in one smooth motion that earned her angry shouts from the attendant. Sorry, she thought but didn't say. Sorry for everything. The train doors were closing. Maya threw herself through the gap and stumbled into the car, just as they shut behind her. She pressed herself against the door, gasping for breath, and looked back at the platform. 2 security guards burst into the station, looking around wildly, but they were too late. The train was already moving. Maya watched them recede into the distance and felt something between relief and horror. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She was a thief now. That was real. That had happened. Maya found a seat in the crowded train car and tried to look normal, tried to control her breathing, tried to stop shaking. No one was looking at her. Everyone was absorbed in their phones or books or their own thoughts. Just another girl on the subway. Anonymous. Invisible. Exactly what she needed to be. She rode the train for 20 minutes, changing lines twice, making sure no one was following. Her mind was racing faster than her heart. What had she done? What was she going to do now? The wallet felt like a bomb in her pocket. Evidence of a crime. Evidence that she crossed a line she could never uncross. Maya got off at a random stop and walked until she found a coffee shop. One of those generic chains that existed on every corner in New York. She ordered a water because her mouth was desert dry and her hands were still shaking, and the barista gave her a concerned look but didn't ask questions. Maya took her water to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the closed toilet seat with the stolen wallet in her trembling hands. This was it, the moment of truth. She'd imagined maybe there'd be a few $100s in cash, maybe 1,000 if she was incredibly lucky. She'd take what she needed for the first payment and figure out the rest later. Maybe leave an IOU note. Maybe find a way to pay it back. Somehow, the rationalizations kept piling up, but they felt thinner now, more desperate, less convincing. Maya opened the wallet with fingers that wouldn't stay steady. The leather was soft and expensive and smelled like money. Inside, she found cash. She counted it carefully. $847. Not 8,000. Not 18,000. $847. Maya wanted to laugh or cry or scream. She'd just committed a felony for $847. That wouldn't even cover one day of hospital care. Wouldn't cover a single medication. Was nothing. Was worse than nothing because now she was a criminal and she still couldn't save her mother. There were credit cards. 3 of them. Black cards with Alexander Cross embossed in silver lettering. But Maya couldn't use those. Credit cards were traceable. Using them would be like sending up a flare to tell police exactly where she was. The cards were useless to her. Worse than useless. They were evidence. Maya stared at the pathetic stack of cash and felt despair settle over her like a weight. This had been her plan. Her desperate, terrible plan. And it had failed. She destroyed her morality and her future for $847. And then she saw the photo. It was tucked behind the credit cards, worn and faded like it had been there for years. A photograph of a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and a bright smile. She was laughing at something off camera, and her face was full of joy and light. Maya stared at the photo and felt something cold creep down her spine. The woman looked familiar. The shape of her face, the way she smiled, the eyes. Maya pulled out her phone with shaking hands and pulled up a photo of her mother. One from years ago, before the illness, when Eleanor was still healthy and beautiful and full of life. She held the photograph from the wallet next to her phone screen, and her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother. Younger, happier, but unmistakably her mother. This billionaire, Alexander Cross, had a photograph of Maya's mother in his wallet. A photograph that looked decades old. A photograph he kept all this time. Maya's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Why would Alexander Cross have a photo of Eleanor? How did they know each other? Her mother had never mentioned knowing anyone wealthy. Never mentioned anyone named Alexander except. The memory came rushing back. Her mother's delirious words in the hospital. Alexander Cross. 4 seasons. Always loved him. Tell her someday. Maya's hands were shaking. So badly, she almost dropped the wallet. She pulled out the business card. Alexander Cross, CEO, Cross Industries. She Googled him on her phone, pulling up image after image. Alexander Cross at charity events, at business conferences, at galas. And then she found an older photo, one from a Columbia University alumni magazine from 23 years ago. Young Alexander Cross, newly married, building his first company. Maya zoomed in on his face, really looked at it, at his eyes, blue-gray eyes, the same color as Maya's eyes, the eyes she'd always wondered about because they didn't match her mother's warm brown. No, that wasn't possible. Maya's mind was rejecting what her eyes were seeing. Alexander Cross couldn't be. He wasn't. There was no way. But her mother had said his name, had said she'd always loved him, had said tell her someday. Tell who? Tell Maya. Was her mother trying to tell her something? Was this? Oh God. Was Alexander Cross her father? The father who didn't know about her. The father from a different world. The father her mother never named. Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. She'd just stolen from her own father. A father who didn't know she existed. A father who'd abandoned her mother 23 years ago. A father whose eyes she'd inherited. Back at the Four Seasons, Alexander Cross stood at the front desk with hotel security and 2 police officers, and his mind wasn't on the theft at all. His mind was on that girl's face. Those eyes. The desperate, terrified expression. The way she looked at him for just 2 seconds before running. Alexander had filed hundreds of police reports over the years. Corporate espionage attempts. Theft. Fraud. He knew the procedure. Description of stolen property. Value. When and where security footage. But when the officer asked if he wanted to press charges, Alexander heard himself say something unexpected. Find her first. But don't press charges yet. I want to talk to her. The police officer frowned. Sir, this is theft. We need to. Just find her, Alexander interrupted. His assistant James was standing beside him looking confused. Boss, what are you doing? But Alexander couldn't explain because he didn't fully understand himself. All he knew was that girl's face had triggered something in his memory. Something he'd buried for 23 years. Eleanor. That girl looked like Eleanor. Had Eleanor's eyes and Eleanor's bone structure and Eleanor's desperate intensity. And the girl looked about 22, maybe 23. The same age Eleanor would have been when Alexander had left her. When he'd chosen his family and his empire and walked away from the only woman he'd ever really loved. The math was impossible to ignore. 23 years ago, a girl who looked exactly like Eleanor. The right age. Those eyes that haunted Alexander's dreams. What if? The thought was too big and too terrible to finish. What if Eleanor had been pregnant when he left? What if she tried to tell him and he'd been too much of a coward to listen? What if he had a daughter he'd never known about? A daughter who was now so desperate she'd resorted to stealing? Alexander felt like he'd been punched in the chest. The wallet didn't matter. The money didn't matter. Nothing mattered except finding that girl and knowing the truth. I want her found, Alexander told the police. But gently. No force. I think. He paused, trying to find words for something impossible. I think she might be connected to someone I used to know. James was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Boss, connected how? Alexander didn't answer. He just pulled out his phone and called his head of security. I need you to find someone, he said. A girl, early 20s, dark hair, blue-gray eyes. She was just here. Get me everything. Name, address, family, everything. And then he pulled up the security footage on the hotel computer and froze the frame on the girl's face. He stared at it for a long time. At those eyes that looked like his eyes. At that face that looked like Eleanor's face. At the desperation that reminded him of every mistake he'd ever made. Maya sat in that coffee shop bathroom clutching the stolen wallet and feeling her entire world rearrange itself. She was holding her father's wallet. Her father who'd abandoned her mother. Her father who had billions while she and Eleanor struggled. Her father who kept a photo of Eleanor even after all these years. Which meant what? That he loved her? That he regretted leaving? Or just that he was sentimental about his past mistakes? Maya felt anger rising alongside the shock. This man had everything. Everything. And he'd thrown away her mother. Had thrown away Maya before she was even born. And now, through some cosmic irony, Maya had stolen from him. Had taken his money to save the woman he'd abandoned. It felt like justice. Like karma. Like the universe balancing scales. But it also felt wrong because Maya wasn't a thief. And this wasn't who she wanted to be. She looked at the $847 and wanted to throw it away. Wanted to march back to that hotel and shove it in Alexander Cross's face and scream at him for every year he wasn't there. For every birthday. Every struggle. Every time her mother worked herself to exhaustion. But she couldn't. Because her mother was dying and $847 was $847 more than she had an hour ago. It wasn't enough. Wasn't close to enough. But it was something. Maya put the cash in her pocket. Left the credit cards and the photo and the business card in the wallet. She walked out of the coffee shop bathroom and threw the wallet in a trash can on the street. Got rid of the evidence. But she couldn't get rid of what she'd learned. Couldn't unknow what she now knew. Alexander Cross was her father. And her mother was dying. And somehow, Impossibly, their worlds were about to collide in ways none of them could predict. Maya just discovered a clue that could change everything. But 85% of viewers will never know what happens next because they're watching without subscribing. Don't be a spectator to someone's journey and then vanish. Subscribe to Olivia the Storyteller, or at least have the courage to comment why you won't. Your choice matters. Make it. Alexander Cross couldn't sleep. It was 3 a.m, and he was sitting in his penthouse office with the security footage playing on repeat on his laptop screen. He'd watched it maybe 50 times already. Watched the girl enter the hotel lobby. Watched her hesitate. Watched her approach the counter. Watched the moment she took the wallet. But mostly, Alexander watched the moment when their eyes met. 2 seconds. Frame by frame, he could see her face change from determination to fear to something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, though that was impossible. They'd never met. Alexander was sure of that. He would have remembered those eyes. James found him there at 6 a.m, still staring at the frozen frame on the screen. The girl's face, caught mid-turn, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "Boss," James said quietly, "you've been up all night." Alexander didn't look away from the screen. "Tell me what you see," he said. James moved closer, squinting at the image. "I see a girl who made a bad choice." Alexander shook his head. "Look at her eyes. Really look." James studied the image for a long moment, and then his expression shifted. "She looks like someone," he said slowly. "Yeah," Alexander replied, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else. Something that sounded like grief. "She looks like someone I used to know." James had been Alexander's assistant for 8 years. He knew things about his boss that no one else knew. He'd seen Alexander on his worst days, had covered for him during the divorce, had watched him build an empire while looking like a man who'd lost something irreplaceable. Why not just press charges and move on? James asked. "This is what insurance is for." Alexander finally looked away from the screen. "Because I need to know who she is. I need to know why she looks like that. Why she has those eyes." James frowned. "What eyes?" "My eyes," Alexander said quietly. "She has my eyes, James. And she has Eleanor's face." The name hung in the air between them. Eleanor. James had heard that name exactly once in 8 years, on a night when Alexander had too much to drink and started talking about the biggest mistake he'd ever made. The girl he'd loved and left. The one that got away. "You think," James started, but couldn't finish. Alexander stood up and walked to the window. His penthouse overlooked Central Park, and the city was just starting to wake up, early morning light turning the buildings gold. "I need you to hire someone. Not the police. Someone private. Discreet. I need to know everything about this girl. Name, address, family, history, everything." And James, he turned back to his assistant, "I need this done quietly. No police involvement yet. No charges filed. Just find her." By noon, Alexander had hired the best private investigator in New York. A woman named Sarah Chen who'd worked for the FBI and now charged $5,000 a day for cases she found interesting. This case, apparently, was interesting. Sarah took one look at the security footage and said, "I'll have preliminary information by evening." Alexander spent the day in meetings he couldn't focus on. His mind kept drifting back to that frozen moment, those eyes, that face, the possibility that was too huge and terrible to fully acknowledge. He'd made a choice 23 years ago, had walked away from Eleanor, had convinced himself it was the right decision, had built an entire life on that choice. What if that choice had consequences he'd never imagined? What if Eleanor had been pregnant? What if he had a daughter? The thought made him feel like he was falling. Alexander Cross, who controlled billion-dollar corporations and made decisions that affected thousands of people, felt completely out of control. He pulled strings to delay the police investigation, made calls to people who owed him favors, used his influence to make sure no arrest warrant was issued, no charges were formally filed. "Just buy me time," he told everyone. "I need to understand what happened before we involve the legal system." People agreed, because Alexander Cross was the kind of man people agreed with. But the truth was simpler. Alexander was terrified. Terrified of what he might discover. Terrified of what he'd done. Terrified that he'd abandoned his own child. At 3 in the afternoon, Alexander did something he hadn't done in years. He went down to the storage unit where he kept boxes from his past. Things from college and graduate school that he couldn't throw away but couldn't look at either. He found the box he was looking for in the back corner, covered in dust. His hands were shaking as he opened it. Inside were papers and books and notebooks, and buried at the bottom a shoebox. Alexander sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit and opened the shoebox with the care of someone handling explosives. Inside were photos, dozens of them, all of Eleanor. Eleanor laughing. Eleanor studying in the library. Eleanor in his apartment wearing his shirt. Eleanor at a coffee shop. Eleanor, Eleanor, Eleanor. 23 years of trying to forget, and he kept every single photograph like some kind of penance. Alexander picked up one photo at random. Eleanor at a party, smiling at the camera, her face full of light. He pulled out his phone and brought up the security footage. Put the photo next to the frozen image of the girl. The same bone structure, the same smile, the same everything, just 23 years apart. This girl, this thief, looked like Eleanor had looked when Alexander loved her. Looked like Eleanor before he destroyed everything. Across the city, Maya was at the public library using one of their computers because her phone battery had died and she needed answers. She'd gone back to the hospital and used the $847 to make a partial payment on Eleanor's treatment. The hospital had accepted it as a down payment, said it bought them maybe another day. Maybe. Eleanor was still unconscious, still dying, still running out of time, and Maya was running out of options. But before she figured out what to do next, she needed to understand what she discovered in that wallet. She needed to know if Alexander Cross was really her father. Maya started with basic searches. Alexander Cross net worth, Alexander Cross biography, Alexander Cross family. The articles painted a picture of a self-made billionaire, though Maya noted with some bitterness that self-made was easier when you started with a trust fund. He'd built Cross Industries from a small tech startup into a multinational corporation. He was known for his business acumen and his charitable work. He'd been married once, to Catherine Morrison, but they divorced 10 years ago. No children. That phrase jumped out at Maya. No children. No known children, maybe. Because if Maya's suspicions were right, Alexander Cross had at least one child. One he'd never met. One he'd abandoned before she was even born. Maya dug deeper. She found photos of Alexander at various ages. Young Alexander in college. Middle-aged Alexander accepting awards. Current Alexander at business conferences. And then she started looking for anything that connected him to Columbia University, where her mother had gone to graduate school. She found alumni magazines, society pages, event announcements, and then, buried in an archive of the Columbia Daily Spectator from 23 years ago, she found it. A photo from a business school mixer. The caption read, "Future business leaders gather for annual networking event." And there, in the center of the photo, was young Alexander Cross with his arm around a young woman. Eleanor Bennett, her mother's maiden name. Her mother's face. Maya's hands started shaking, so badly she had to put them flat on the desk to steady them. She zoomed in on the photo. There was no mistaking it. That was her mother, 23 years younger, standing close to Alexander Cross with his arm around her waist. They were both smiling. They looked happy. They looked like a couple. The date on the newspaper was October 15th, 23 years ago. Maya pulled up the calculator on the library computer. She knew her birthday, March 27th. She counted backward. 9 months before March 27th was late June. This photo was from October. 4 months before. "Oh my God," Maya whispered out loud. An elderly man at the next computer shushed her. Maya barely heard him. Her entire life suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. Her mother's refusal to talk about her father. The torn photographs. The one time Eleanor had said he didn't know about you and some people live in different worlds. Alexander Cross was from a different world. A world of wealth and privilege and old money. Eleanor had been a scholarship student. Of course his family wouldn't have approved. Of course he would have chosen his inheritance over a poor grad student. Of course he'd left. And Eleanor, young and pregnant and alone, had never told him. Had raised Maya by herself. Had protected Maya from the knowledge that her father was a billionaire who'd chosen money over them. Maya felt something dark and hot rise in her chest. Anger. No, not just anger. Rage. This man, this Alexander Cross, had everything. Had billions of dollars. Had power and influence and every advantage in the world. And he'd thrown away her mother. Had condemned Eleanor to a life of poverty and struggle. Had condemned Maya to growing up without a father. And now Eleanor was dying because they couldn't afford treatment that would be pocket change to Alexander Cross. The injustice of it was overwhelming. Maya wanted to scream. Wanted to find Alexander Cross and make him look at what his choices had cost. Make him see the woman he'd abandoned dying in a hospital bed. Make him understand what he'd done. But underneath the rage was something else. Something that felt like grief. Maya had spent her entire life wondering about her father. Imagining him. Sometimes she pretended he was dead because that was easier than thinking he just didn't want her. Sometimes she'd imagined he was searching for her. Sometimes she'd made up stories where he was a good man who had a good reason for being absent. And now she knew the truth. Her father was alive and wealthy and had never once tried to find her. Had never even known she existed because he'd walked away from her mother before Eleanor could tell him about the pregnancy. Did that make it better or worse? Maya didn't know. All she knew was that she'd just stolen from her own father. That their eyes had met in that hotel lobby, and neither of them had known they were looking at family. At exactly 4:37 in the afternoon, Sarah Chun called Alexander with preliminary information. Her name is Maya Eleanor Torres, Sarah said. 22 years old. Columbia University student, junior year, pre-med. Mother is Eleanor Torres, formerly Eleanor Bennett. The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Eleanor? He'd been right. Father unknown, Sarah continued. They live in Queens. Or lived, rather. Eleanor Torres was admitted to Mount Sinai Hospital 3 weeks ago with acute organ failure. She's currently in the ICU. Critical condition. Maya Torres has no criminal record until tonight. By all accounts, she's a good kid. Scholarship student. Works 3 jobs. No history of theft or violence. This appears to be, Sarah paused, an act of desperation. Alexander sat down heavily in his office chair. Eleanor was dying. His Eleanor. And he hadn't even known she was in New York. Hadn't known anything about her life for 23 years. And their daughter. Because there was no doubt now. The timeline was perfect. The age was right. Those eyes that matched his. Maya was his daughter. His daughter who was so desperate to save her mother that she'd resorted to theft. His daughter who had no idea who he was. His daughter who'd looked at him with those terrified eyes and run. What hospital? Alexander asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Mount Sinai, Sarah replied. Room 417 in the ICU. Alexander was already standing, already grabbing his coat. Boss, James said from the doorway. Where are you going? To fix the worst mistake I ever made, Alexander said. To meet my daughter. To save Eleanor. To do what I should have done 23 years ago. James, I need you to call the hospital. I need full access to Eleanor Torres's medical records. I need to know what treatment she needs. I need to know the cost. And I need it now. Do we have a name? James asked. Maya, Alexander said quietly. Her name is Maya. My daughter's name is Maya. 2 people are about to discover a truth that will shatter everything. You're about to discover whether you care enough about their story to subscribe to Olivia the Storyteller. The difference. Their discovery will cost them everything. Yours costs you 1 click. Subscribe now, or tell me in the comments what's holding you back. I want to understand. Maya stood at the hospital billing window with $847 in cash clutched in her hand and tried to look like someone who hadn't just committed a felony to get it. The billing clerk, a tired woman named Sandra whom Maya had come to know over the past 3 weeks, looked at the money with surprise. You found funding? She asked, and there was genuine relief in her voice because Sandra had seen too many families in situations like Maya's and most of them didn't end well. Maya nodded because she couldn't trust her voice. This is enough for the initial deposit on the experimental treatment, Sandra said, counting the bills carefully. It buys you maybe 48 hours while we process the full payment arrangements. You still need to secure the remaining funds, but this is a start. Do you have a payment plan for the rest? No, Maya wanted to say. I have nothing. I have a father I just discovered who has billions, and a mother who's dying, and $847 that I stole, and no idea what to do next. But what she actually said was, "I'm working on it." Sandra gave her a sympathetic look that said she'd heard that before, and it usually meant there was no plan, but she processed the payment anyway. "Dr. Chin will be notified," Sandra said. "They'll begin the treatment prep immediately. Your mother is very lucky to have you." Maya felt those words like a knife because she didn't feel lucky. She felt like a criminal, like someone who'd crossed a line that decent people didn't cross, like someone her mother wouldn't recognize. Maya went back to Eleanor's room in the ICU and found her mother awake. Actually awake, not the semi-conscious delirium of the past few days. Eleanor's eyes were open and focused, and when she saw Maya, she tried to smile, though the effort seemed to exhaust her. "Baby," she whispered. Her voice was rough from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. "You look tired." Maya almost laughed because of course her mother would be worried about her even while dying. "I'm fine, Mom. But you're awake. You're really awake." Eleanor's hand moved weakly on the hospital blanket, and Maya took it, careful of the 4 lines. "Dr. Chin said something about a payment," Eleanor said slowly. "Said we have enough for treatment to start." "Where did you get the money, Maya?" The question hung in the air between them. Maya could lie. Should tell her mother she'd taken out a loan, or that the GoFundMe had suddenly taken off, or that some anonymous donor had appeared. But Maya was so tired of lying, so tired of pretending everything was okay when nothing was okay. And looking at her mother's face, seeing the life draining out of her day by day, Maya felt something break inside. "I stole it," she said quietly. "I stole a wallet from a man at a hotel. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know what else to do. You were dying and no one would help, and I didn't know what else to do." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and Maya braced herself for disappointment, for shame, for her mother's heartbreak at what Maya had become. But Eleanor just squeezed her hand with what little strength she had. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to do that. This is my fault. All of this is my fault." Maya shook her head. No, this isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." But Eleanor was crying now, weak tears sliding down her thin face. "What was his name?" she asked. "The man you stole from. What was his name?" Maya felt her heart start to pound. She pulled out the business card she'd kept, the one from the wallet, crumpled now from being in her pocket. "Alexander Cross," she said, watching her mother's face carefully. Eleanor gasped, and it turned into a cough that racked her whole body. Maya grabbed the water cup, helped her mother drink. When the coughing subsided, Eleanor was staring at Maya with an expression of such profound grief that Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You know him," Maya said. It wasn't a question. "Mom, you know him." "How do you know him?" Eleanor closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, they were full of a pain that had nothing to do with her illness. "Maya," she said softly, "baby, that man, Alexander Cross." She paused, struggling with words that had been locked inside for 22 years. "He's your father." Maya had already figured this out, had already done the research and seen the photos and counted the months. But hearing her mother say it out loud, hearing the confirmation spoken in this sterile hospital room, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Maya felt like the ground was tilting beneath her. "I know," she whispered. "I found a photo. I did the math. I know." Eleanor's tears were falling faster now. "I should have told you. I should have told you years ago. But I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain that your father was someone who chose money over love. How do you tell your child that? How do you explain that their father didn't even know they existed because he walked away before I could tell him I was pregnant?" Maya sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed, still holding her mother's hand. "Tell me now," she said. "Tell me everything." So Eleanor did. The words came slowly, interrupted by coughing and exhaustion, but the story emerged. 23 years ago, Eleanor had been a grad student in public health at Columbia. Poor, ambitious, determined to make a difference. She'd met Alexander Cross at a coffee shop. He was in business school, from old money but trying to build something of his own. They'd fallen in love. Secret love, hidden love, because Alexander was ashamed of her. Not ashamed of who she was, Eleanor clarified, but ashamed to introduce her to his family. A shame that she didn't fit into his world. They'd had 3 perfect months. 3 months where Eleanor had believed that love could bridge the gap between their different worlds. And then Alexander's family found out. They gave him an ultimatum. Marry the appropriate girl they'd chosen for him, the girl from the right family with the right connections, or lose everything. His inheritance, his business connections, his future. And Alexander had chosen the future they'd planned for him. He'd ended it with Eleanor in a 5-minute conversation that destroyed her. "I thought you were different," Eleanor had told him. "I thought you saw me as more than where I came from. But in the end, you're just like everyone else, afraid of losing your privilege." And Alexander hadn't argued, hadn't fought, had just walked away. 2 weeks later, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She'd gone to Alexander's apartment to tell him, had stood outside the building for an hour trying to work up courage. And then she'd seen him leaving with another woman. Catherine Morrison, Eleanor learned later. The woman he was supposed to marry. The appropriate choice. They'd looked happy together, or at least compatible. And Eleanor had realized something standing there on that street. If she told Alexander about the pregnancy, one of 2 things would happen. Either he'd do the right thing and stay with her out of obligation, resenting her and their child forever. Or he'd offer money, try to pay her off, reduce their baby to a problem that could be solved with cash. Eleanor didn't want either of those futures. So she'd walked away, had raised Maya alone, had worked 2 jobs and sacrificed everything, and never once regretted her choice because Maya was the best thing that ever happened to her. "I don't regret having you," Eleanor said, her voice fierce despite its weakness. "Not for 1 second. You are the greatest joy of my life. But I do regret." She paused, struggling. "I regret that you grew up without a father. I regret that my pride kept me from at least trying to tell him. I regret that my choices led to you standing in a hotel lobby stealing from your own father because I'm dying, and we don't have money for treatment that he could afford 1,000 times over. Maya, I am so sorry." Maya was crying now too, tears streaming down her face silently. "Don't apologize," she said. "You did everything right. You gave me everything. This isn't your fault. It's his. He's the one who walked away. He's the one who chose money over you. Over us." Eleanor squeezed Maya's hand. "He didn't know about you," she said. "That's important. He didn't choose to abandon you. He just chose to abandon me, and he didn't know you existed. Does that make it better? I don't know, but it's the truth." Maya didn't know if it made it better either. Her father hadn't known she existed, had spent 22 years not knowing he had a daughter. Was that better or worse than deliberately abandoning a child? Maya couldn't decide. While Maya sat in that hospital room learning the truth about her father, Alexander Cross was sitting in his office learning the truth about his daughter. The full investigator's report had arrived. Maya Eleanor Torres, born March 27th. 22 years, 8 months ago. Alexander counted backward. 9 months before Maya's birth was late June. He'd ended things with Eleanor in January, which meant Eleanor had been pregnant when he left her, had been carrying his child, had been trying to tell him, and he'd been too much of a coward to listen. Or maybe she hadn't been trying to tell him. Maybe she'd known he'd make the wrong choice again. Maybe she protected their daughter from him. Alexander read through Maya's entire life in bullet points. Scholarship student, high achiever, track team, 3 part-time jobs, pre-med, everything Eleanor had been. Smart, driven, determined to help people. And poor, so poor that she'd resorted to theft to save her mother. Alexander's hands were shaking as he read. This was his daughter. This girl he'd seen for 2 seconds in a hotel lobby. This girl with his eyes and Eleanor's face. This girl he'd missed every single moment of her life. Her first words, her first steps, her first day of school, every birthday, every achievement, every moment. Gone. Lost. Because he'd been a coward 23 years ago. James stood in the doorway watching his boss read the report, and for the first time in 8 years, James saw Alexander Cross cry. Not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. "Boss," James said quietly. Alexander looked up and his face was destroyed. "I have a daughter," he said. "I have a daughter and I missed everything. Eleanor was pregnant. She was pregnant and I left her. I left them both. James, I have a daughter who grew up poor while I was building an empire. I have a daughter who had to steal from me to save her mother because I wasn't there. Because I chose wrong. Because I was a coward. The phone on Alexander's desk rang. He ignored it. It rang again. James answered. It was the hospital. Mount Sinai. Calling about Eleanor Torres. The caller explained that a Mr. Cross had inquired about patient records earlier. They were calling to inform him that Eleanor Torres's condition had deteriorated. She'd woken briefly, but the stress had triggered complications. They were doing everything they could, but her organs were failing rapidly. Without immediate treatment, she had hours, maybe less. The experimental treatment was scheduled to begin, but they needed full payment authorization. $250,000. Did Mr. Cross want to authorize payment? Yes, Alexander said, taking the phone from James. His voice was rough but steady. Yes, authorize full payment immediately. Whatever she needs, whatever the cost. I'll wire the money within the hour. And he paused, then added, I'm coming there. I'm coming to the hospital now. Don't tell anyone. Not the patient, not her daughter. I need to be there. The hospital administrator agreed. Alexander hung up and stood. He looked at James. I have a daughter, and she doesn't know who I am. Her mother is dying, and it's my fault because if I'd been there, if I'd been paying child support, if I'd been a father, they would have had money for treatment. This is my fault. All of it. James had never seen his boss like this. Broken. Vulnerable. Completely undone. Boss, he said carefully. You didn't know. You can't blame yourself for not knowing. Alexander shook his head. I should have known. I should have asked. I should have tried to contact Eleanor over the years. I should have, but he couldn't finish because there were too many shoulds. Too many moments where he'd chosen wrong. Too many chances to be better that he'd missed. I'm going to the hospital, he said finally. I'm going to save Eleanor. And then I'm going to meet my daughter and hope she doesn't hate me. Though she'd have every right to. What are you going to say to her? James asked. Alexander pulled on his coat. The truth, he said. That I'm her father. That I didn't know. That I'm sorry. That I want to make it right if she'll let me. That I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. That started as a whisper and ended as something that sounded like a prayer. James watched him leave and felt like he was watching history change. Watching mistakes get confronted. Watching a man try to fix something he'd broken before it was too late. Or maybe it was already too late. Maybe some things were too broken to fix. James didn't know. But he knew Alexander was going to try. Alexander just discovered he has a daughter he abandoned without knowing. You're discovering whether you have the integrity to subscribe to Olivia the storyteller after watching this family's pain. One of these is forgivable. Choose wisely. Or comment and finish the sentence. I don't subscribe because. Own your choice. Maya was still sitting beside her mother's bed, holding Eleanor's hand, both of them crying quietly, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps. Multiple people. The kind of footsteps that meant official business. Maya's stomach dropped because some part of her had known this was coming. Had known that stealing from a billionaire wouldn't go unpunished. Had known that her desperate act would catch up to her eventually. She just hadn't expected it to happen so fast. The door to Eleanor's room opened and 2 police officers walked in, their faces professionally neutral. Behind them was a hospital security guard Maya recognized from the lobby. Maya Torres, the first officer said. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and tired eyes that said he'd done this too many times. Maya stood up slowly, still holding her mother's hand. Yes, she said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. You're under arrest for theft, the officer continued, and he was already reaching for his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can, and will be used against you in a court of law. No, Maya said. No, you don't understand. My mother is dying. I can't leave. I can't. The officer's expression didn't change. You should have thought of that before you stole a wallet, he said. Not unkindly, just factually. Eleanor's machine started alarming. The sudden stress had triggered something, her heart rate spiking, her blood pressure dropping. No, Eleanor gasped, trying to sit up and failing. Don't take her. Please. She was trying to save me. Please don't take her. Dr. Chen rushed into the room, pushing past the officers. "What's happening here?" she demanded. "We're arresting a suspect," the second officer said. Dr. Chen looked at Maya, at Eleanor's distress, at the monitor's screaming warnings. "You need to leave," she said firmly. "My patient is crashing. You can arrest her later, but right now you need to get out." The first officer shook his head. "We have a warrant. We're taking her in." Dr. Chen's face went hard. "If my patient dies because you stressed her into cardiac arrest, I will personally make sure your department faces a lawsuit they'll never forget. Get out. Now." Maya felt hands on her arms, felt the cold metal of handcuffs clicking around her wrists. She was being pulled backward, away from her mother, and Eleanor was crying and reaching for her, and the machines were screaming, and Maya couldn't breathe. "Mom," she sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you. I love you so much." And then she was in the hallway, being led toward the elevator, and the last thing she saw was Dr. Chen and two nurses rushing into her mother's room and the door closing behind them. Maya had stolen $847 to save her mother's life, and instead she'd just killed her. The guilt was suffocating. The fear was paralyzing. Maya let herself be led away, because what else could she do? She'd made her choice. Now she had to face the consequences. The police station was exactly like Maya had seen in movies. Fluorescent lights that hummed. Beige walls. The smell of bad coffee and desperation. They took her fingerprints. Took her photo. Put her in a holding cell that was empty except for a metal bench and a toilet that was probably older than Maya. She sat on the bench and put her head in her hands and tried not to think about her mother dying alone in a hospital room. Tried not to think about how this was all her fault. Tried not to think about anything at all. Time passed in a blur. Maybe an hour. Maybe 3. Maya had lost track. And then she heard voices. Raised voices. Someone shouting. Maya looked up. Through the bars of her cell, she could see into the main area of the station. A man had just walked in. Tall, expensive suit, commanding presence. It took Maya a moment to recognize him, and when she did, her blood ran cold. Alexander Cross, the man she'd stolen from. Her father who didn't know he was her father. Or did he know now? Is that why he was here? Maya's heart started racing. He'd come to make sure she was prosecuted, to see her punished, to make an example of the girl who dared to steal from him. But Alexander wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the detective at the main desk. "Drop all charges," Alexander said, and his voice carried across the entire station. "Now." The detective, a younger man with a skeptical expression, frowned. "Sir, this is an active investigation. We can't just drop charges because the victim requests it." "Yes," Alexander said firmly. "You can. And you will. Call your supervisor if you need to. Call the district attorney. Call whoever you need to call. But those charges get dropped right now." The detective stood up, clearly annoyed. "Mr. Cross, I understand you're upset about the theft, but we have procedures. The girl stole nearly $1,000 from you. She needs to face justice." Alexander's expression changed. Something fierce and protective crossed his face. "That girl," he said, and his voice had gone quiet in a way that was somehow more intimidating than shouting, "is my daughter." The entire station went silent. Every officer, every clerk, every person in that space stopped what they were doing and stared. The detective blinked. "You're what?" "My daughter," Alexander repeated. "She didn't know. I didn't know. But I know now. And whatever she took from me, I owe her 1,000 times over. So drop the charges. Now." Maya felt like the world had tilted sideways. He knew. Alexander knew she was his daughter. How did he know? When did he find out? And why was he here? Why was he helping her after she'd stolen from him? The detective was stammering something about needing to verify, needing to check with his captain, needing to follow procedure. Alexander cut him off. "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm telling you. My lawyers are already on their way. Those charges will be dropped one way or another. You can do it now and save everyone time, or you can wait for my legal team to make your life difficult. Your choice. Make it fast because my daughter's mother is dying in a hospital and we don't have time for bureaucracy." 20 minutes later, Maya was released. No charges filed. They gave her back her possessions. The $8 and change that was in her pockets when she was arrested. Her phone dead now. Her student ID. She walked out of the holding area and into the main station, and Alexander Cross was standing there waiting for her. Their eyes met, blue-gray meeting blue-gray. Father and daughter seeing each other clearly for the first time. Maya felt 1,000 emotions crash through her simultaneously. Relief that she wasn't going to jail. Anger at this man who'd abandoned her mother. Confusion about why he was here. Fear about what happened next. And underneath it all, something she didn't want to acknowledge. A tiny, traitorous feeling that might have been hope. You knew, Maya said. Her voice came out harsh, accusatory. You figured it out. Alexander nodded slowly. The investigator I hired found you. Found your mother. The timeline. The birth certificate. Everything. He paused. I didn't know, Maya. When I left your mother, I didn't know she was pregnant. I know that doesn't make it better. I know I still abandoned her. But I want you to know that if I'd known about you, he stopped. His voice had gone rough. I want to believe I would have made different choices, but I don't know if that's true. I was a coward 23 years ago. I chose money and status over love. That's who I was. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. What do you want? She asked. Why are you here? Alexander took a step forward. Maya took a step back. He stopped. Your mother, he said. Eleanor. She's still alive. I called the hospital. They stabilized her. And I've authorized full payment for her treatment. $250,000. It's already been wired to the hospital. She can begin the experimental treatment immediately. Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. What? Why would you do that? Alexander's expression was painful to look at. Because she's the mother of my child, he said quietly. Because I owe her 23 years of support I never gave. Because it's the right thing to do. Because I failed you both once and I won't fail again. Maya wanted to scream at him. Wanted to tell him it was too late. That money didn't fix abandonment. That he didn't get to play hero after 2 decades of absence. But her mother was alive. Her mother was getting treatment. Her mother was going to survive. And this man, the stranger who was her father, had made that happen. I don't need you, Maya said, but her voice cracked. I don't need your money, or your guilt, or your attempts to fix things. Alexander nodded. I know, he said. I know you don't need me. You've survived 22 years without me. You and your mother are the strongest people I've ever heard of. You don't need me. But, he paused, but I need you. I need the chance to know my daughter. I need the chance to make this right if you'll let me. I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask. But I'm asking anyway. They drove to the hospital in Alexander's car. A black Mercedes that probably cost more than every place Maya had ever lived combined. The drive was silent and thick with tension. Maya sat in the passenger seat and stared out the window and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She'd stolen from a billionaire, discovered he was her father, been arrested, been released, and now her father, who she'd never met, was driving her to the hospital where her dying mother was being saved by his money. It felt surreal, like a dream or a nightmare. Maya couldn't tell which. They walked into Mount Sinai together, and the staff looked at Alexander with the kind of deference that money commanded. Mr. Cross, Dr. Chen said, appearing in the hallway. Thank you for the payment authorization. We've already begun preparing Mrs. Torres for the experimental treatment. She's stable now. The earlier crisis was managed. Maya pushed past them and went to her mother's room. Eleanor was awake, looking exhausted but alive. Baby, she said when she saw Maya. I thought they took you. I thought I'd lost you. Maya went to her bedside and took her hand. I'm okay, Mom. I'm here. And then Alexander appeared in the doorway. Eleanor saw him and gasped. The sound was small and broken and full of 23 years of complicated feelings. Alexander, she whispered. You came. Maya watched them look at each other. Her mother and her father. 2 people who'd loved each other once and hadn't seen each other in over 2 decades. The air in the room felt charged with history and pain and questions that had waited too long for answers. Alexander took a tentative step into the room. Eleanor, he said, and his voice was gentle. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For leaving. For not knowing. For all of it. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I never told you, she said weakly. About Maya. I should have told you, but I was scared and hurt and I thought it would be better if you didn't know. Alexander shook his head. I gave you every reason to believe I'd make the wrong choice, he said. You protected our daughter from me. That was probably the right call. But now I know. And I want to be here if you'll let me. If she'll let me. He looked at Maya. I want to try to be the father I should have been. Maya felt something hot and painful rise in her chest. You don't get to do that, she said, and her voice was shaking with anger. You don't get to just show up with money and fix everything and expect us to be grateful. You abandoned my mother. You chose your precious inheritance over her. You let her struggle and work herself to death while you built your empire. You have billions and we had nothing. Nothing. Do you know what that's like? Do you know what it's like to watch your mother work 2 jobs and still not have enough? To wear the same clothes for years? To skip meals so she can eat? To grow up knowing your father didn't want you? I didn't know, Alexander said, but there was no defense in his voice. Just acknowledgement. You're right. I let your mother struggle. I chose wrong. I was a coward, and you grew up without a father because of my choices. I can't change that. I can't take back 22 years. But I can be here now. I can help now. If you'll let me. Maya laughed, but it sounded like crying. Help! You think this is helping? You think throwing money at the problem makes you a father? Eleanor's weak voice cut through the tension. Maya, she said. Baby. He didn't know. I never told him. If you're going to be angry at me too. I made choices. I chose to raise you alone. I chose not to tell him. Those were my decisions. No, Maya said fiercely. You made those choices because he showed you who he was. He chose his family's money over you. What were you supposed to do? Chase after a man who'd already rejected you? Beg him to be a father? You protected me, Mom. You did everything right. This is on him. She turned back to Alexander. You want to be a father now? Now that it's convenient? Now that I'm grown and you don't have to do the hard work of raising a child? She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I needed a father when I was 5 and kids at school asked why I didn't have one. I needed a father when I was 12 and couldn't afford the field trip. I needed a father when I was 15 and Mom collapsed and I was terrified and alone. Where were you then? I was being selfish, Alexander said quietly. I was building a company and marrying the wrong woman and living a life that looked successful but felt empty. I was thinking about your mother and wondering what happened to her and being too much of a coward to find out. I was wasting time on things that didn't matter while you and Eleanor were struggling. There's no excuse. There's no justification. I failed you both, and I have to live with that. But, and his voice strengthened, I'm here now. I know it's not enough. I know it's too late. But I'm here and I want to try. If you'll give me the chance. The room fell silent except for the beeping of Eleanor's monitors and the sound of Maya crying. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. We need to begin the treatment now, she said gently. Mrs. Torres needs to be prepped. Maya wiped her eyes. How long? How long will it take? Dr. Chen's expression was cautiously optimistic. The treatment itself will take several hours. She'll need to be monitored closely. We won't know if it's working for at least 24 to 48 hours. But the sooner we start, the better her chances. Eleanor looked at Maya. Go home, baby, she said. Get some rest. You've been here for days. I'll be okay. Maya shook her head. I'm not leaving you. I'm staying right here. Eleanor smiled weakly. Then at least go get some food. You're going to make yourself sick. Maya started to argue, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Fine, she said, but I'm coming right back. She turned to leave and Alexander spoke. I'll come with you, he said. We can talk. Maya wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him she didn't need his company or his conversation. But a tiny part of her, the part that had spent 22 years wondering about her father, wanted answers. Wanted to understand. Wanted to know who he was. Fine, she said, but don't expect this to fix anything. They found a cafeteria in the hospital basement. Maya got coffee and a sandwich she had no appetite for. Alexander got coffee he didn't drink. They sat at a corner table surrounded by doctors and nurses on break and families waiting for news about their loved ones. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The coffee was terrible. The moment was surreal. I don't need a father. Maya said finally, breaking the silence. I've survived this long without one. I don't need you to swoop in and save the day. Alexander nodded. I know, he said, but whether you need one or not, you have one. And I'd like to try to be in your life if you'll let me. Not to replace the years I missed. I can't do that, but to be here going forward. Maya looked at him, really looked at him, at the expensive suit and the face that looked like an older version of the face she saw in the mirror, at the eyes that matched hers, at the man who was her father and a stranger simultaneously. What do you want from me? She asked. What do you expect? Alexander was quiet for a moment. I don't expect anything, he said finally. I just want the chance to know you, to hear about your life, your interests, your dreams, what you want to do with your future. I want to support you in whatever way you'll allow. And I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. You have family, not just your mother, me. And if you want, I can be here. However much or little you want me to be. Maya felt exhausted, emotionally wrung out. She'd gone from daughter of a single mother to daughter of a billionaire in the span of a day. Her entire identity had shifted. Everything she thought she knew about herself had changed. I don't forgive you, she said quietly, for leaving my mother, for missing my entire life. I don't forgive you, and I don't know if I ever will. Alexander met her eyes. That's fair, he said. I don't forgive myself either. Maybe we can work on it together. Maya almost smiled despite herself. That's a terrible dad joke, she said. Alexander did smile, small and sad. I'm new at this, he admitted. I'm probably going to be terrible at being a father. But I'm going to try. They sat there in that hospital cafeteria, father and daughter, with 22 years of distance between them and a tentative first step toward closing that gap. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. It wasn't a happy reunion. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, Maya thought, beginnings were enough. Maya and Alexander just had the meeting that will define their lives. You just had a meeting with a subscribe button you keep ignoring. Olivia the storyteller brings you these stories every week. Show up for them, the way Alexander showed up for Maya. Subscribe, or tell me in the comments why their story doesn't matter enough. Your move. They wheeled Eleanor away at 7:43 in the evening. Maya watched her mother disappear behind the double doors that led to the surgical wing and felt her heart go with her. Dr. Chun had explained the procedure in careful, measured terms designed to manage expectations without destroying hope. The experimental treatment was a combination of targeted immunotherapy and gene therapy. They would essentially reprogram Eleanor's immune system to stop attacking her own organs while simultaneously repairing the damage that had already been done. In clinical trials, the treatment had shown a 40% success rate. 40%, which meant 60% of patients didn't make it. Those weren't good odds. But they were better than zero, which is what Eleanor had without the treatment. The surgery would take approximately 8 hours, Dr. Chin had said. Maybe longer if there were complications. They'd know within the first few hours if Eleanor's body was accepting the treatment or rejecting it. If her organs started to stabilize, that was a good sign. If they continued to fail, well. Dr. Chin hadn't finished that sentence, but Maya understood. If Eleanor's organs continued to fail, there was nothing else they could do. This was the last option. The final chance. Everything depended on the next 8 hours. Maya had nodded like she understood, like she could process what 8 hours of not knowing felt like, but she couldn't. Time had become something elastic and terrible. Each minute stretched into an eternity. Maya and Alexander sat in the surgical waiting room on opposite ends of a row of uncomfortable plastic chairs. The room was designed to be calming with soft blue walls and landscape paintings that were probably supposed to be soothing but just looked generic. There was a coffee machine in the corner that burbled and hissed. A television, mounted on the wall, played the news with the sound off. 3 other families waited for their own loved ones, huddled in their own private hells. Maya stared at the double doors her mother had disappeared through and tried not to think about the fact that Eleanor might not come back out. Tried not to think about 40% success rates and 60% failure. Tried not to think about becoming an orphan at 22. Alexander cleared his throat. Maya didn't look at him. The silence between them was heavy with things unsaid, with 22 years of absence, with anger and grief and the strange gravity of shared DNA. Finally, Alexander spoke. Tell me about her, he said quietly. About your childhood. I want to know. I want to know everything I missed. Maya felt anger flash through her. You don't get to know, she wanted to say. You don't deserve to know. But another part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, wanted to tell him. Wanted him to understand what he'd missed. Wanted him to feel the weight of his absence. She was the best mother anyone could ask for, Maya said, her voice flat. She worked 2 jobs my entire childhood. Waitress during the day, cleaning offices at night. Sometimes she'd work 16-hour days and still come home and help me with homework. She never complained. Never made me feel like I was a burden, even though I know I was. Even though raising a kid alone, while poor, is the hardest thing in the world. Alexander was quiet, absorbing this. What did you want to be when you were little? He asked. Maya almost laughed because the question was so normal, so parental, so completely out of place. An astronaut, she said, then a veterinarian, then a teacher, then a doctor. Always something that helped people. Because that's what Mom taught me. That we help people. That's what matters. Did you play sports? Alexander asked. Track, Maya said. I was fast. Still am. Got a partial scholarship for it. That's how I got to Columbia. Half track scholarship, half academic. Still had to work 3 jobs to cover the rest, but I made it work. Alexander's face did something complicated. You're at Columbia, he said, and it wasn't quite a question. I went to Columbia. I know, Maya said coldly. I've done my research. I found the photos. You and my mom at some business school party. You looked happy. He looked like he'd been punched. We were happy, he said quietly. For 3 months, I was happier than I'd ever been. And then I threw it away because I was afraid of what my family would think. Because I was a coward. The hours crawled by with brutal slowness. 8 p.m. became 9, became 10. Maya got coffee she didn't drink. Alexander made phone calls to his office, canceling meetings, rearranging his schedule. James appeared at some point with food neither of them ate. The other families in the waiting room gradually left, called back to see their loved ones or to receive news, good or bad. Maya and Alexander remained. At 11 p.m., Alexander started talking again. I married someone I didn't love, he said to the air, to Maya, to himself. Catherine. We were married for 10 years, and we were never happy. Not once. We were partners in the way that business partners are. Polite. Efficient. Completely empty. We never had children. She didn't want them and I. He paused. I don't know if I didn't want them or if I was just terrified I'd mess it up. That I'd fail in the way I failed your mother. Maya looked at him for the first time in hours. Did you ever think about her? She asked. About my mom. Every day, Alexander said without hesitation. I kept a photo of her in my desk drawer for 23 years. I'd look at it sometimes and wonder what happened to her. If she was happy. If she thought about me. If she hated me. I hoped she'd moved on. Found someone better. Someone who deserved her. I never imagined. His voice broke. I never imagined she was raising our daughter alone. That you existed. If I'd known. Maya cut him off. But you didn't know, she said. And that was your choice. You left her. You chose not to know. At midnight, Maya started talking. Not because she forgave him. Not because the anger had faded. But because the waiting was unbearable, and talking was better than sitting in silence thinking about all the ways her mother might be dying behind those doors. She told him about growing up poor. About wearing thrift store clothes and pretending she didn't care when kids made fun of her. About the apartment in Queens with the broken elevator and thin walls. About watching her mother work herself to exhaustion and feeling helpless. About the first time Eleanor collapsed when Maya was 15 and how terrifying it was to see your invincible parent suddenly fragile. She told him about high school. About running track because it was free and because being fast felt like having power when everything else in your life felt powerless. About getting straight A's because education was the only way out of poverty, and Maya was determined to get out. About applying to colleges, knowing she'd need full scholarships or she couldn't go. About getting into Columbia and crying because it felt like winning the lottery. About starting pre-med because she wanted to understand what was wrong with her mother. Wanted to fix it. Wanted to save her. Alexander listened to every word like they were precious, like he was trying to memorize 22 years of his daughter's life in one night. Sometimes he asked questions. Sometimes he just listened. Sometimes Maya saw tears on his face that he didn't bother to wipe away. At 1 a.m, Maya asked him a question. Why did you keep her photo? If you moved on, if you married someone else, why keep a picture of the woman you left? Alexander was quiet for a long time. Because I never stopped loving her, he said finally. I made a choice. I chose my family's approval and my inheritance and my future. But I never stopped loving Eleanor. That photo was my reminder of the price of my ambition. The cost of my cowardice. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that I'd had something real and I'd thrown it away for something that looked valuable but was worthless. Maya felt something shift in her chest. Something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but might have been understanding. At 2 a.m, Dr. Chun came through the doors. Her face was impossible to read. Surgical mask pulled down around her neck. Exhaustion in every line of her body. Maya and Alexander both stood immediately. Maya's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. Eleanor was alive, or she wasn't. The treatment worked, or it didn't. Everything came down to whatever words came out of Dr. Chen's mouth next. Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the doctor and wait for her world to either continue or end. There have been complications, Dr. Chen said, and Maya felt the floor drop out from under her. During the treatment, your mother developed internal bleeding. Her organs began to shut down. We've been working to stabilize her for the past 3 hours. She's fighting, but... Dr. Chen paused and Maya knew what came after but was never good. But she's crashing. Her blood pressure is critically low. Her heart is struggling. We're doing everything we can, but I need you to understand that the next few hours are critical. She might not make it through the night. I'm so sorry. We're doing everything we can. Maya's knees gave out. Just stopped working. She felt herself falling, and then there were hands catching her. Strong hands. Alexander's hands. He was holding her up, holding her together, and Maya was breaking apart. She was sobbing, deep wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal and terrified. Not my mom, she was saying over and over. Please, not my mom. She's all I have. Please. She's all I have. Alexander held his daughter, this girl he'd just met, this person he'd failed before she was even born, and he held her while she shattered. His own tears were falling silently. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm so sorry. For everything. For all of it. They stood there in that waiting room, father and daughter united in grief and fear, and Maya realized something. She was angry at Alexander. Furious at him for abandoning her mother, for missing her entire life, for choosing money over love. But in this moment, she was grateful he was here. Grateful she wasn't alone. Grateful for these arms holding her up when her own legs couldn't. It didn't fix anything. Didn't change the past. But it was something. A small mercy in a moment that had none. Can we see her? Maya asked, pulling away from Alexander and wiping her face. Dr. Chen hesitated. She's not conscious. She's on full life support. It might be. She stopped, reconsidering. Yes, she said. You can see her. But only for a few minutes. Maya and Alexander followed Dr. Chen through the double doors, down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fear, into the ICU where Eleanor lay surrounded by machines. She looked so small, so fragile, tubes in her mouth and nose and arms, monitors tracking every struggling heartbeat. Maya went to one side of the bed. Alexander stood at the foot, looking at the woman he'd loved and left with an expression of such profound regret that it was painful to witness. Maya took her mother's hand. It was cold, too cold. Mom, she whispered, I need you to fight. Please. I know you're tired. I know you want to rest. But I need you to fight. Just a little longer. Please. She was crying again, tears falling on Eleanor's hand. I can't do this without you. I don't know how to be in the world without you. Please don't leave me. Please. Alexander spoke, his voice rough. Eleanor, he said. It's Alexander. I know you probably can't hear me. But if you can. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for leaving you. For not being there. For all of it. But thank you. Thank you for our daughter. She's extraordinary. She's everything good about you, and somehow nothing bad about me. She's the best thing I never knew I had. So please, please fight. For her. For yourself. For the life you deserve to live. They stood there, the three of them, connected by blood and history and desperate hope. The machines beeped steadily. Eleanor's chest rose and fell with mechanical assistance. Time felt suspended, frozen. Maya found herself praying to a god she didn't believe in, making bargains with the universe. Take anything else. My future. My dreams. Anything. Just let her live. Just let her survive this. She'll be good. She'll be better. Just please let her live. Alexander was praying too. Maya could see his lips moving, could see his hands gripped tight on the bed rail, could see him bargaining with fate the same way she was. Two people who didn't believe in prayer, praying anyway, because what else was there to do when the person you loved was dying? Dr. Chin came back. You need to let us work, she said gently. Go back to the waiting room. We'll update you as soon as we know anything. Maya didn't want to leave, wanted to stay here, holding her mother's hand, as if her presence alone could keep Eleanor tethered to life. But she let herself be led away, let Alexander guide her back to the waiting room. They sat down in those uncomfortable plastic chairs. 3 a.m. became 4. 4 became 5. Dawn started to creep through the windows. The hospital began to wake up. Shift changes, new nurses, the bustle of morning routines. And still no news. At 6:17 in the morning, Dr. Chun came through the doors again. This time her face was different, tired but not devastated, cautiously hopeful. Maya and Alexander stood. Maya couldn't speak, couldn't ask, could only stare at the doctor and wait. She's stabilizing, Dr. Chin said, and Maya felt the world rush back in. The internal bleeding is under control. Her organs are starting to respond to the treatment. Her blood pressure is coming up. Her heart is strengthening. It's too early to say for certain, but Dr. Chin smiled, small but real. But I think she's going to make it. The treatment is working. She'll need months of recovery. She'll need ongoing care. But she's going to live. Maya collapsed into the nearest chair and buried her face in her hands and cried. Not the desperate, terrified crying from before. This was relief. Pure, overwhelming relief that felt like being underwater and finally breaking the surface. Her mother was going to live. Eleanor was going to survive. They'd gotten their miracle. Alexander sat down beside her, his own face wet with tears. He didn't touch her, didn't try to hug her. Just sat there, close enough that Maya could feel his presence. Close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. When Maya could finally speak, she looked at him. Thank you, she said. For the treatment. For being here. For. She couldn't finish, but Alexander understood. You don't have to thank me, he said. This is what family does. This is what I should have been doing all along. They sat there in that waiting room as the sun came up, father and daughter, two broken people beginning to heal. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Maya was still angry, still hurt, still processing 22 years of abandonment, but her mother was alive, and her father, for all his failures, had shown up, had saved Eleanor, had been there when it mattered most. It was a start, maybe not a good start, maybe not enough, but it was something. And sometimes, Maya was learning, something was all you got. Sometimes you had to build from broken pieces and hope they eventually form something whole. Eleanor just fought for her life and won. You're fighting the urge to subscribe to Olivia the storyteller and losing. The difference. Eleanor's fight mattered. Your resistance doesn't. Hit subscribe or comment below and complete the sentence. I watched this entire crisis and still won't subscribe because. Let's see your reason. 3 months later, Eleanor Torres walked without assistance for the first time since the treatment. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February, and the physical therapy room at Mount Sinai was full of people fighting to reclaim their bodies from illness and injury. Eleanor had been coming here 5 days a week for 12 weeks, slowly rebuilding strength that had been stolen by years of illness and weeks in a hospital bed. Her physical therapist, a patient woman named Keisha, walked beside her as Eleanor took careful steps across the room. 10 steps, then 20, then 30. Maya watched from a chair against the wall, her heart in her throat, every time her mother wobbled. But Eleanor didn't fall. She made it all the way across the room and back, and when she finished, she was crying and smiling at the same time. I did it, Eleanor said, breathless and proud. Baby, I did it. Maya was there in a second, hugging her mother carefully because Eleanor was still fragile, still recovering, still rebuilding. "You did it," Maya said, and she was crying too. "You're so strong, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." Alexander stood near the door. He'd been coming to Eleanor's physical therapy sessions for the past 6 weeks. Not every session. He'd learned early on that his presence could be overwhelming. But he came when Eleanor said it was okay. When Maya didn't object. When there was space for him in this family that was slowly, carefully, forming around the crater of his 23-year absence. The first month after Eleanor woke up had been brutal. She'd been weak, disoriented, in pain from the surgery and the treatment and the months of illness before that. Maya had moved into the hospital room, sleeping in the chair beside her mother's bed, refusing to leave. Alexander had paid for a private room, had arranged for the best post-surgical care, had hired nurses to be there round the clock. Maya had wanted to refuse it all, wanted to tell him they didn't need his money, but she couldn't. Because they did need it. Because her mother was alive, because of his money. That was a truth that sat in Maya's chest like a stone. Heavy and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. Eleanor had mixed feelings about Alexander's involvement. On one hand, he'd saved her life, had paid for treatment she could never have afforded, had done what Maya's desperate theft couldn't accomplish. On the other hand, he was the man who'd abandoned her 23 years ago. The man who'd chosen his inheritance over their love. The man who'd never once tried to find her after he left. Those two realities existed simultaneously, creating a complicated mess of gratitude and resentment that Eleanor was still trying to navigate. They'd had exactly one conversation about their past, in the second week of Eleanor's recovery, and it had been painful and necessary. "I loved you," Eleanor had said, her voice still weak but her words clear. "When you left, it destroyed me. I was pregnant and scared and alone, and I thought about telling you. I stood outside your apartment for an hour trying to work up the courage. And then I saw you with her, with Catherine, and I realized that if I told you, you'd either resent me forever or try to buy me off. I didn't want either of those futures for our baby. So I walked away. I raised Maya alone, and I don't regret it." Alexander had listened with tears streaming down his face. "I failed you," he'd said. "I was a coward. I let my family dictate my choices. I let fear of losing my inheritance matter more than loving you. There's no excuse for that. You did the right thing. You protected Maya from me, from who I was. I'm just grateful you're giving me a chance, now, to try to be better." Their relationship now was careful and respectful but not romantic. Too much damage had been done. Too much time had passed. Eleanor was 51 years old and had built a life without Alexander Cross. She didn't need him to complete her, didn't need his love or his validation. But she could acknowledge that he was trying, that he'd shown up when it mattered, that he was learning to be a father to Maya, however late. That counted for something. Not everything, but something. They had dinners sometimes, the three of them, awkward affairs where conversation came in fits and starts and long silences filled the spaces between words. But they were trying. That was what mattered. They were all trying. Alexander was learning what it meant to be a father to an adult daughter who didn't need him but was willing to let him try. He couldn't read her bedtime stories, or teach her to ride a bike, or go to her school plays. All of that was gone. Lost to his choices. What he could do was show up, be present, listen when Maya talked, ask questions, learn who she was now instead of mourning who she'd been when he wasn't there to see it. He learned that Maya was fiercely independent, that she didn't want to be saved or fixed or taken care of, that she'd survived 22 years without a father and she didn't need one to suddenly start making decisions for her. He learned this the hard way when he offered to pay for her medical school. It was a Tuesday afternoon about 8 weeks into Eleanor's recovery. They were having coffee, just the two of them, Maya's first time agreeing to see Alexander without Eleanor present. "I want to help with your education," Alexander had said. "Medical school is expensive. Let me pay for it. You shouldn't have to work 3 jobs and take out massive loans. Let me do this for you." Maya had set down her coffee cup very carefully. "No," she'd said. "Thank you, but no." Alexander had been confused. "Why not? I can easily afford it. It would be nothing for me." "That's exactly why," Maya had said. "Because it would be nothing for you. Because I need to earn this. I need to know that I got here on my own. That my success is mine, not something bought for me. But you wouldn't be where you are without scholarships, Alexander had argued gently. Without financial aid. Without help. Why is accepting help from your father different? Because those scholarships I earned, Maya had said, those were merit-based. I worked for those. If you pay for medical school, it's not about what I earned. It's about who my father is. And I need to be more than that. I need to be Maya Torres, who earned her degree, not Maya Cross, whose billionaire father bought her success. Alexander had been quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. Okay, he'd said finally, I understand. I respect that. But if there's another way I can help, something you'd be comfortable with, let me know. 2 weeks later, Alexander made a different offer. He'd started a charitable foundation years ago, one that focused on healthcare access for low-income communities. It was well-funded and well-respected and did actual good work. He offered Maya a paid internship for the summer. Real work, real responsibilities, real pay that was based on standard internship rates, not nepotism. She'd be working with their public health team, helping to develop programs that addressed exactly the kind of healthcare inequities that had almost killed her mother. It's not charity, Alexander had explained. It's a job. You'd be hired based on your qualifications, your public health background, your personal understanding of the system's failures. If you weren't my daughter, I'd still want someone with your experience on the team. Maya had thought about it for 3 days before saying yes. On her terms, with her boundaries. But yes, the healing was slow and nonlinear. There were good days and bad days. Days when Maya could look at Alexander and see her father, see someone trying his best, see possibility. And days when she looked at him and saw only the man who'd abandoned her mother, who'd missed her entire childhood, who'd built a fortune while they struggled. Those days were hard. On those days, Maya kept her distance and Alexander respected it. He was learning that being a father to an adult daughter meant accepting that she got to set the terms. That forgiveness wasn't something he could demand or expect. That showing up consistently was its own reward, even when the reception was cold.